Chapter 4, Stress and Learning. Intelligence grows by moving from the known, predictable, into the unknown, unpredictable. When we know the probable outcome of an event taking place around us, our body systems can remain fairly passive and relaxed. We can maintain touch with the environment by the skimpiest of sensory samplings. That is, we need attend the world around us only sporadically and peripherally. Our senses bring us ceaseless stream of reports concerning our world, but these grow humdrum and tedious. A surprising amount of life is repetitious, and after a time, any repetition tends to be screened out of awareness. We
Okay,
shift
so
the editing of any problem? Are we okay?
Yeah, one second. Okay, so intelligence grows by moving from the known, predictable into the unknown, unpredictable.
Hello.
So I think there's some problem with this.
Hello.
Yeah. Now is it okay? I mean, people are okay. So intelligence grows by moving from the known predictable into the unknown unpredictable. So as we move from the unknown to the known, we gain in intelligence.
Hello.
Okay. Now, when something keeps repeating in our lives, then we don't need to pay attention to it. Are you all getting that? So that's why the sensory sampling is there. We don't process all the data that we are receiving. We only process the data which is important for us at that point in time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Shika, continue.
Today, Nikkei, there's a lot of
Shika is saying
disturbance.
she can't hear.
Actually, people are coming in late now. So, chaliye.
I think Shika is saying she can't hear. There's a message.
Shika can't hear.
Yeah.
But we can all hear.
Yeah.
Hello.
Now
Yeah.
we can hear you. Chaliye.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, Shika, we can hear you. There's something wrong with Shika.
Shika, we can't hear you.
अन्य फोटो नहीं आएगी क्या? हाय भैया.
अरे.
फोटो चाहिए क्या?
So Shika just left, Niket, so maybe she will rejoin, maybe.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, she joined that meeting. Good.
Yeah, she's come.
Yeah, now I can. So sorry, I was not able to hear anything.
Don't worry. Chalo, chalu karo.
I think I just continue from where we left.
Our senses.
A surprising amount of life is repetitious, and after a time, any repetition tends to be screened out of awareness. We shift
So
the
what?
editing.
Just 1 second. So what this implies is that let's say you go to a place and you smell something. You know, after some time you'll stop smelling it. Why? Because that stimulus is constant. So after some time, the brain will decide this is no longer important and will stop processing that data. Okay.
Yeah. We shift the editing of repetitive sensory reports to automatic brain processes in order to free our awareness for internal processes of thinking, such as daydreaming. We spend a large part of our adult lives establishing routines that allow us to function within a minimum of sensory sampling.
So this is like what muscle memory means, right? Now, when we start learning to drive a car, we have to be wary of where the wheel is turning, the brake, the accelerator, the gears. But after some time, it becomes automatic. So you really don't have to think about doing what you're doing. Okay, this is what this is meaning.
The unknown is a set of circumstances whose outcome we cannot be sure of. The unknown, unpredictable, sensory data that do not fit the brain's established editorial policies, big enough to be handled automatically by various subordinates. Then the editor-in-chief, I, the decision-making self, must be summoned to the scene. All body processes must be alerted.
So whenever
Body has an alert
you know,
mechanism.
whenever we are poised with something which is new, that is when we start paying attention, and all the body processes start working properly in an alert manner.
The body has an alert mechanism just for the purpose of this coordination. This alert mechanism is activated when sensory data report an event that goes beyond the boundaries of the automatic, known or predictable. When this happens, the pituitary gland releases hormones that activate the adrenal steroids. These hormones stimulate and activate the body-brain system in whatever amount the situation seems to call for, whether just a bit to liven up the sleepy system or a massive amount for an all-out frightful emergency.
Okay, I think this is clear.
Yeah. This organizing of the body and brain to deal with the immediacy of an event and respond accordingly is stress. Such an activating and coordinating of the body's muscular system with the sensory system and awareness shuts out imagination and gives a direct sensory involvement and immediacy that we call excitement. The infant is born into the world in a state of general excitement or stress. Children and young people actively seek out the stress of excitement, often to the despair of their parents. Adults must have some form of excitement or stress, and most of us seek it within the bounds of safety by experiencing it either vicariously by television or in mountain climbing, hang gliding, skiing, tennis, racing, adultery, or what have you.
Okay.
The average human brain has some 10 billion neurons or thinking cells, but intelligence rests not so much on the number of cells as on the number of connections between these cells.
Okay, so you'll get that the cells, at a certain point in time, when you're growing up, after some time, if you have not been using some of the brain cells, they get eradicated. But neural flexibility is still there, or neural plasticity they call it, is the number of connections which are made between the cells. So the dendrites keep going and making new and new connections. This is what he's talking about over here.
A neuron can have as many as 10,000 connecting links, dendrites and axons, with other cells or almost none. A single cell can be directly or indirectly linked with as many as 6 lakh other cells. These connecting links and the patterns of rhythmic cell firing possible through such linkages are what provide the ability to process information. The more connections, the greater the brain's computational ability.
Are you all getting this? So whenever a pattern is created in the brain, and whenever any stimulant is there, which is associated with a neural pathway, that neural pathway gets activated. So like suppose you go to Taj Mahal and you smell a smell over there. Now, if you smell that same smell anywhere else, the picture of Taj Mahal will come into your consciousness. This is what this means.
Stress is the way intelligence grows. At moments of extreme stress, the pituitary gland produces a hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, which in turn activates the adrenal steroids, tightening up the body's defense systems. Scientists have injected rats with ACTH and found that the rats immediately produce large quantities of new proteins in the liver and brain. Proteins of this sort seem instrumental in both learning and memory. And on being injected with ACTH, the rat's brain immediately grows massive numbers of new connecting links between the neurons. The same results can be obtained by simply subjecting rats to electric shock for 20 minutes a day. Electric shock creates extreme stress in the rats. The stress brings about ACTH production, and the adrenal steroid chain is alerted as the system tries to process the radically threatening sensory information and make an accommodation or adapt to it.
Okay, so intelligence grows via stress. But again, if you are in a totally stressed out environment all the time, it can become counterproductive, as we'll see in the next few pages.
Such stimulated rats prove to be far more intelligent and adaptable than non-stimulated rats. They can learn faster than ordinary rats, solve problems more easily, adapt more quickly, and survive much better. Before converting your high chair to an electric chair, however, bear in mind that although the stressed mind brain grows in ability and the unstressed one lags behind, the overstressed one collapses into physiological shock and shuts out everything. Stressing the system is only half of the natural cycle of learning. The English scientist Hans Sale Nobel Prize for his analysis in The Stress of Life, the title of his book on the subject. Sale showed that all life are balances of stress and relaxation. Stress relaxation is a yin-yang effect. You cannot have one without the other if life is to be maintained. Even the elements of physical matter, atoms, molecules, and such exist in a balance of stress and relaxation. The rhythm of intellectual growth is movement into the unknown, unpredictable, or stress, and assimilating or digesting it back into the known, predictable, or relaxation. Each such assimilation and adaptation to the unknown increases the scope of the known, the relaxed state.
Okay, so this becomes very important over here. If you're constantly stressed out, then learning and growth will not take place. So you need stimulation and then relaxation, stimulation and then relaxation. That's the only way that you can actually start learning. Everyone got that? Okay, people need to unmute their phones. Okay.
So Bhaiya,
Yeah.
some amount of stress is not bad, that means basically.
No. Some amount of stress is actually a good thing, provided it just raises your bar. And if too much of stress is there, then again it creates a problem.
So actually, in real life, also when we work under stress, we take out the best of our own self. So
True.
that's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if that stress it becomes overbearing, then it starts creating a problem and learning doesn't take place. It's cause a deterioration.
Yeah. Correspondingly, each such adaptation increases the ability to move into more unknowns, presenting even greater stress or unpredictability because of the broader base of predictability through which we can assimilate the unknown and make a proper accommodation to it. For most of us, prolonged alertness proves exhausting. After some high stress encounter, we collapse into a heap of relaxation, generally aided by a few cocktails. Our lives are not a calm balance of the yin and yang of stress and relaxation, in which we remain permanently alert in a relaxed way. They are a wild swing back and forth between anxious tension and sensory retreat.
Are you all getting this? So, if we are associating with more and more new stimulus, the more resilient we will start becoming. But then if we do not have the balance between stress and relaxation, it creates a lot of problems with us. And then what he says here, there are wild swings back and forth between anxious tension and sensory retreat. So people can start going into depression, they can start isolating themselves, they don't want to do anything more. So it's like overworking yourself and then collapsing.
Coordinating decision making, rerouting of new sensory data, and making new accommodations all require a general alertness or stress equal to the job at hand. Consider, for instance, the many minor emergencies that take place while you drive a car. Once you have learned to drive, the automatic pilot within you take over and free your general consciousness for daydreaming or talking to yourself or to others while driving. In an emergency, however, you must stop talking and attend to what the automatic pilot was previously attending to. The body's flight fight response takes control until the emergency is over, and this leaves no part of you for conversation. When an emergency is over, the all clear sounds in the body, the production of adrenal steroid stops, the heartbeat returns to normal, and the muscles relax. But if the outcome is
But
not
what happens? In most cases, after the tension wala situation is over, you don't come into a normal state again. It takes time for us to come back into a normal state, which causes the stress to be there. Okay, now if you're overstressed, it always will create a problem. So the more resilient you are, the easier you can come back to a normal state. That is where all our tools that we are learning in all the workshops and programs allows you to become more and more resilient in stressful situations.
But if the outcome is not successful and stress piles on top of stress, then shock, a condition of sensory cutoff, may occur. When sensory information brings in nothing but waves of high stress and critical danger that we cannot adapt to, the body may shut out all sensory intake. What the body learns in such a state is negative. It learns that it has survived the high stress by a blackout of reality itself, a minor death.
Have you all got that? So if we are overstressed, we go into panic, we go into so we go into panic, and then no learning will take place. Whenever that same stimulus is, we are the same, we are subjected to that same stimulus, we'll again go into panic mode. That's why, like fear of falling, or when someone is driving and has had an accident, they'll not want to drive again. That kind of situation.
Failure to assimilate and accommodate to new information breeds the confusion and anxiety of unresolved stress. To enter into an unpredictable situation and accept it openly is to flow with its energy, be augmented in your own energy and relax its tensions and stresses accordingly.
Okay, so if I go to an emergency room and there's a doctor who, ye karna hai, ye karna hai, ye karna hai, ye karna hai, and there's another doctor who sees the situation, gently gives orders and instructions to people and gets the job done. Who are you going to like to have around you? Will someone answer?
The second person.
Why?
Yeah, because he did not add to your stress. He just made you calmer. He got the work done, but did it in a better manner.
Exactly. So that's the basic idea. The more resilient you are, the more you can handle a situation which is stressful around you.
To interact with a high stress situation means to have the ability to accept the stress. Ability in this sense is the same as the ability to lift a heavy object or run up a flight of stairs. Stress relaxation is an ability of the mind, brain, and muscular mindedness must be developed, just as body musculature must be developed. Intellectual strength is a muscular mindedness by which greater and more complex, unknown, unpredictable situations can be entered into, assimilated by the brain system, and accommodated by a proper response.
Okay, so the more dexterity you have, the more ways in which you have handled stress before, makes you more and more resilient to handle greater and greater stress.
Yeah. The successful intelligence knows and is able to act on the knowledge that the life principle of stress relaxation is inviolate, just as the atom holds its fantastic stresses in a relaxed balance. The strong intelligence knows that stress must create its own relaxation when the natural mind-brain-body process of interaction is allowed to unfold. A developed intelligence is one that knows and can act accordingly, that no matter how stringent or apparently destructive some opposing force might seem to be, the stress relaxation principle must hold. By interacting with a force or event, its energy must augment our own and give us power over any destructive elements within that situation.
Okay.
The weight lifter builds his power through stressing and relaxing his muscles. Muscular mindedness is built through successful practices of stress relaxation. This gives personal power and is the source of joy. However, the cycle can take place only from a firm matrix or known base of power, and our job as parents is to make sure that this construction is successful in the infant child. The genetic plan prepares for and tries to assure the formation of just such a secure base of knowing right from the beginning. The periods of prenatal life, delivery, birth, and infancy are all genetically designed to provide exactly the kinds of experience needed for the brain to structure its place for power. The mother
Carry
is
on.
the in-
Yeah. Carry
The
on.
mother is the infant's first matrix and the source of his or her possibility. She is the place of power on which the child builds muscular mindedness and develops autonomy, the self sufficient strength to separate from her and become independent. If this matrix does not become fully structured, if such a security and strength are not given from birth, intelligence will have no ground on which to grow. The growing intelligence, and God knows the so called mature one that has no firm matrix, has no choice but to devote its energy and attention to trying to secure that matrix. Without that safe place to stand, no energy can be utilized to explore possibility. Intent cannot move it into content and no fulfillment, and the stress of the unknown, unpredictable becomes a chronic threat. We then spend our lives trying to avoid this threat.
Okay, so the first matrix. So the first matrix of the mother, I mean, each matrix builds on each other, on the previous one. Okay. So now if the first matrix is not solid, then automatically it will create problems when we go into the next matrices. And we'll always be going backwards to harness the previous matrix, although we have already moved into the next matrix. And this is where autism and all that starts to come in.
An intelligence whose matrix as mother has not formed sufficiently at birth cannot explore and structure a knowledge of the earth on a full dimensional level. For this child, the earth as matrix cannot become functional as designed when the child is about 7 years of age. Rather than the whole world becoming the source of possibility, energy, and the safe place to stand, it becomes the enemy, the adversary, the danger. The person denied the first matrix remains grounded in that earlier stage, trying to establish some arbitrary and artificial safe place of his or her own making. It is a compensation that never works.
Okay, anyone has anything to say about this chapter? No, let's move.
Chapter 5, The New Demonology, Exorcising Nature. The headline of a national newspaper ran, Stress, the Enemy Within. Medicine Men, the article reported, considered stress one of the major killers of our day. In an article on brain research, a prominent magazine featured a medicine man's glowing account of new chemicals by which we could combat stress. By synthetically matching certain body chemicals, we can now fool the body into relaxing its high state of chronic stress. Thus, this medicine man gloated. A chemotherapy pill will replace the sadly inefficient psychiatrist or psychologist, and we may all live happily in a state of chemical euphoria. Stress, of
So,
course, is the
there is this book called Chemicals of, Molecules of Emotion. In that, it's very well described how these chemicals work. But whenever we are taking a dose from outside, we do not know the exact dosage required and the timing of the dosage required. The body has its own intelligence to create all these molecules, which are now synthetically being developed just to stop us experiencing some things which are very natural to experience. And the body has its own way of dealing with them.
stress, of course, is the very fiber of life and surely of intelligence. Why should indeed, how did stress become the enemy within? Obviously, the life giving balance of stress and relaxation has been seriously upset. We are locked into a cultural stress atmosphere in which relaxation becomes almost impossible unless it is chemically induced. It is stress that truly proves to be the enemy and aligns with death, but so is relaxation, because if such a state completely takes over, we must put that body 6 feet under.
Have you all got
Consider,
that? If a body is always in stress, and no relaxation, then you're dead. It's as simple as that.
and even vice versa.
Why? What do you mean by if you're relaxed?
Relaxed. Then he
Okay, then
said,
you
no,
won't
then you
move.
just put
Yeah.
your body underground.
Yeah, you need both actually.
You need both. Consider as a minor example of stress avoidance our attempts to maintain a constant room temperature lest we become unpleasantly aware of our bodies. That is, lest our bodies be stressed by hot and cold. Room temperature has grown to a national obsession, demanding ever greater outputs of personal energy, time, money, and attention to maintain. The procedures of maintenance become more and more stressful, of course, as the enemy to be avoided slowly weaves an inescapable net around us.
So this is dealing with, I think, air conditioning and heating.
Yeah. To trace the root causes of this notion of stress as the enemy within us would take volumes because it would lead to the unraveling of the whole fabric of current life. I shall focus on only the most significant assumption that underlies this notion and show how it is the real issue before us. This assumption, which really cripples us, is so axiomatic, so much a part of our whole web of beliefs that to question it seems ridiculous. The assumption runs like this: in this 3 billion years of experimenting, life has evolved our huge and brilliant mind brain system in order that we might have the intelligence to outwit and so survive this life system that has evolved us. That is, we really believe that we have a superior brain in order that we might outwit nature, and we believe we must outwit nature in order to survive her.
See, now
Outwitting
we
means
are all experiencing what nature can do, right? All of us are housebound by one small thing, and we are over. Okay?
sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It's 3 o'clock.
It's 3 o'clock. You want to see this?
Okay.
Outwitting means acting against, dominating, and overcoming.
Your sound is not coming
causes of
clear.
stress. Interaction, the
Shikha, your
cooperative flow of
sound.
energy with the life system is then quite lost to view.
Shikha,
In
your
chapter
sound.
18, I will show how this notion of outwitting nature literally splits our mind-brain system because it poses one half of the brain as the enemy of the other half and turns what should be a splendid synergy into warring camps. Would a 3 billion year experiment in genetic coding really have produced as its finest product a brain whose only purpose is to outwit itself? Yet we believe, apparently with a tenacious passion, that the purpose of human intelligence is to predict and dominate the infinitely contingent and interacting balances of a universal system. We call our supposed successes in this venture progress, and we believe the purpose of our lives is to contribute to this progress. Finally, we gauge all our interpretations of intelligence according to this belief, at which point we surely fall, long and hard. How do we believe that we can predict and control the natural forces of the universe? Through clever intellectual manipulations and tool usage. We accept this notion so completely because we have been conditioned to believe implicitly that only by so using our intelligence can we, in fact, survive nature. Interaction between the mind brain and its source of information has been rigorously, religiously denied by Western logic, if not most cultural logic. Interaction with the living earth would imply that the earth responded in kind, interacting with us. And the one cardinal rule of all classical Western academic belief, which is very much in power over our minds today, is that the mind has absolutely no relation to the world other than to be informed of that world through the senses and to make some sort of intelligent reaction to that information.
Shikha,
This belief
your
has
sound.
automatically robbed
Shikha,
us of personal power. Having no
Shikha,
personal power to draw on, we are reduced to only one source of power, tool usage.
Shikha, you
And
are
so
not
we have
clear.
evolved a continuing body of knowledge concerning the employment, creation, enhancement, and service of tools.
Shikha,
Our
you are
real
not
criterion
clear.
of value becomes the
he's not
culture's
being able to
body
hear.
of knowledge offering or promising enhanced tool production, possible domination of nature, and so some security. Potential is seen as an increase of tools. The training and education of children
I have to
is
redo this.
designed to lead to better tool invention, production, consumption, and handling. Our body of knowledge and tool development has never given,
Shikha,
is not presently giving, and almost surely will never give us either physical security or well-being. The more vast and awesome our tool production has
One
become,
second.
the greater our anxiety.
One second. Let me just deal with this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shikha,
Yes, Bhaiya.
you were
Finally.
not being able to be heard at all.
Oh, I'm so sorry, and I didn't realize at all.
Yes, you shifted the thing and then it created a.
Oh,
To
okay.
start again from the second paragraph of page 35.
Yeah, page 35, second paragraph.
Yeah, there are two of you now. Which phone are you using?
There's two of me. Okay.
Now the volume has become very low.
Nee, the volume is okay now.
The volume is clear now.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's very clear now.
yeah. Okay, so Shika, you can continue.
Okay.
Yeah, now
So,
it's much clearer. Page 35.
yeah.
Yeah, you. I
Okay.
think shut your. Yeah, okay.
So I'll start from in chapter 18.
Yeah.
Okay. In chapter 18, I will show how this notion of outwitting nature literally splits our mind brain system because it poses one half of the brain as the enemy of the other half and turns what should be a splendid synergy into a warring camps.
So, okay,
Would
now
it,
we've got two sides of the brain, right? The left and the right.
Right.
So, the right is the emotional side and the left is the logical side. Now, we are using logic to defeat the external, but actually the internal also needs to get taken care of.
would a 3 billion year experiment in genetic coding really have produced as its finest product a brain whose only purpose is to outwit itself? Yet we believe, apparently with a tenacious passion, that the purpose of human intelligence is to predict and dominate the infinitely contingent and interacting balances of a universal system. We call our supposed successes in this venture progress and believe that the purpose of our lives is to contribute to this progress. Finally, we gauge all our interpretations of intelligence according to this belief, at which point we surely fall long and hard. How do we believe that we can predict and control the natural forces of the universe? Through clever intellectual manipulations and tool usage, we accept this notion so completely because we have been conditioned to believe implicitly that only by so using our intelligence can we, in fact, survive nature. Interaction between the mind brain and its source of information has been rigorously, religiously denied by Western logic, if not most cultural logic. Interaction with the living earth would imply that the earth responded in kind, interacting with us. And the one cardinal rule of all Western academic belief, which is very much in power over our minds today, is that the mind has absolutely no relation to the world other than to be informed of that world through the senses and to make some sort of intelligent reaction to that information.
See, in that movie Avatar, it was very, very clearly shown how the entire world is interrelated. How many of you have seen Avatar? I guess most of you must have seen it.
Yeah.
If you've not seen it, you must watch that movie.
This belief has automatically robbed us of personal power. Having no personal power to draw on, we are reduced to only one source of power, tool usage. And so we have evolved a continuing body of knowledge concerning the employment, creation, enhancement, and service of tools. Our real criterion of value becomes a culture's body of knowledge, offering or promising enhanced tool production, possible domination of nature, and so some security. Potential is seen as an increase of tools. The training and education of children is designed to lead to better tool invention, production, consumption, and handling. Our body of knowledge and tool development has never given, is not only, will never give us either physical security or well-being. The more vast and awesome our tool production has become, the greater our anxiety, hostility, fear, resentment, and aggression. But the direct
So
correlation,
if you see, the more material things that we have got, the more anxiety, the more issues and stress that has come into society.
but the direct correlation between our anxiety and tool production is almost beyond our grasp because our intelligence is itself the result of our conditioning by and within that very body of knowledge. Our intelligence is trained to believe that any imperfections in the reality resulting from our activities, such as personal anguish, misery, and fear, simply indicates the need for improvements in the body of knowledge and or improvements in the tool production, distribution, and application. Even as our body of knowledge splits us off from our lives and creates anxiety and unhappiness, it conditions us to believe religiously that escape from our misery lies in perfecting that body of knowledge. Therein lies the current generation's sincere belief in schooling as a way out of our dark ages.
So all intellectual schooling is there now. Okay, but the physical aspect of learning about nature, about actually learning physically about stuff, that has gone out of the window.
European and American researchers have long observed that infants do not smile until some 2.5 months after birth, on the average. Nor does the early infant display sensory motor learning or general adaptations during this time. Because such a prolonged period of incapacity with no signs of intelligence being manifested is quite unique in this world. May, Many learned papers have been written about the smiling syndrome and post-birth lack of intellectual response in infants. Freud in early neurological studies of infants wrote about the strange vegetative condition, and theories have grown out of this theory in typical academic style. Our body of knowledge finally included as a matter of fact that babies do not, indeed perhaps should not, smile during this 10 to 12-week period after birth because intelligence is non-existent during this time.
Okay, now this is totally false, huh?
It's
But
false.
because the baby is stressed during the birth period and the mothers are also stressed, that preparation to be able to actively get involved with the world after the baby is born does not happen.
In 1932, Catherine Bridges noted that the newborn seems to come into the world in a state of general excitement, but that this excitement quickly changes to distress. Pleasure or smiling, she observed, appears some 2.5 to 3 months later. Ren Spitz wrote about the smiling syndrome and its late appearance, signaling the beginnings of some crude intelligence. The infant has only two states in this period, he observed, quiescence, which meant unconsciousness or sleep, and unpleasure, which meant being awake. Spitz noted that for the first 2.5 to 3 months, the infant either cries or sleeps and little else. Spitz based his position on Freud's concept of the neonate as psychologically undifferentiated organism. This organism still lacks consciousness, perception, sensation, and all other psychological functions. At another point, Spitz writes, I follow Freud's opinion that at birth there is no consciousness. Accordingly, there can be no awareness or conscious experience. Thus, it is rare to find the smiling response before the third month of life. Burton
Bhaiya, can
White
you
of
explain this?
This is what they were observing in the Western children, where the Western children were not smiling till 2.5 months to 3 months after being born. The simple thing was that the babies were subjected to a lot of stress in the birthing process, as well as the mothers were also totally stressed out.
Burton White of Harvard Center for Child Development found research futile for about the first 2 months of life because the infant only sleeps, cries, or feeds during this time. Until smiling begins, he maintained, there is no intelligence. The question arose, why is intelligence so slow in forming? No other species has anything comparable to this long delay in at least some form of intelligent adaptation.
So what happens? Like now, let's say a deer is born. Immediately after birth, the deer stands up. Okay. So what happens to our children?
The question arose, why is intelligence so slow in forming? No other species has anything comparable to this long delay in at least some form of intelligent adaptation. In answer, theories arose, of course, giving rise to other theories concerning this period of stupor, total helplessness, semi consciousness, massive sleeping, excessive crying, and a generally precarious hold on life. Spitz, in fact, assumed that the entire posture of life was devoted solely to physical survival. Naturally, an acceptable answer emerged. The human infant is born prematurely. We are rather like marsupials without pouches. And naturally, another question arose, why is the human born prematurely? Again, an answer dutifully emerged, one in keeping with the whole fallacy. We are born prematurely because of our big brains. Notice that the head of the infant at birth is much larger than the body. Problems arose when humankind got up on its hind legs and started walking upright because this posture closed in the pelvic area and narrowed the birth canal considerably. With this huge head full of all those brains, if the infant were to grow to full term in utero, his head would be too large to pass through the now narrowed canal. So the human infant must be born prematurely to get out at all. No less a person than Jerome Bruner of Harvard Center for Cognitive Studies, surely one of our more brilliant researchers, developed this idea. The assumption is terribly wrong, but the academic rationale growing around it began to include more contradictions blithely ignored because once an idea is accepted into the body of knowledge, everyone knows and no one questions it. Everyone knew that no smiling occurs for some 10 to 12 weeks because infants are born prematurely and have no intelligence during that time.
Okay,
If
so
a
now
mother,
this becomes a big problem. Okay, so anything that is accepted as fact in any kind of scientific principle, to get to change it and to transform it becomes a huge challenge. And even so many papers which are developed about new technologies, new developments, if they do not confer to the current view, they'll not be accepted. So that creates a big problem. Okay, so it became a view that infants will not smile before 12 weeks.
if a mother reported some smiling before that acceptable date, the cryptic diagnosis was gas pains. Meanwhile, in 1956, Marcel Geber, under a research grant from the United Nations Children's Fund, traveled to Africa to study the effects of malnutrition on infant and child intelligence. She concentrated on Kenya and Uganda and made a momentous discovery. She found the most precarious, uh, brilliant, and advanced infants and children were ever observed anywhere. These infants had smiled continuously and rapturously from at least from at the latest their fourth day of life. Blood
Are you seeing
analysis.
the difference? In the Western countries, the children are not smiling for 2.5, 3 months, and here the child is smiling within 4 days. So, what was the distinction and what was the difference?
Medical facilities, everything done.
Yeah, so over there, the children were not stressed out, right?
Yeah,
So
natural
naturally,
births. Maybe.
yeah, you'll see. Just read ahead, then you'll get the answer.
Blood analysis showed that all the adrenal steroids connected with birth stress were totally absent by that fourth day after birth. Sensory motor learning and general development were phenomenal, indeed miraculous. These Ugandan infants were months ahead of American or European children. A superior intellectual development held for the first 4 years of life. Why it ended there will be a point of study in chapter 7.
So
These
definitely,
infants
so now, in after birth, the children were more intelligent, but then something in the culture happens which stops the development of the children. Okay, that we'll read in chapter 7.
These infants were born in the home, generally, generally generally delivered by the mother herself. The child was never separated from the mother, who massaged, caressed, sang to, and fondled her infant continually. The mother carried her unswaddled infant in a sling next to her bare breast continually. She slept with her infant. The infant fed continuously according to its own schedule. These infants were awake a surprising amount of the time, alert, watchful, happy, calm. They virtually never cried. Their
Okay, so you
mothers,
get the distinction of how we bring up our children. The child is forced to be fed at a specific time. Here, the child, whenever the child is hungry, the child feeds. Over here, we make the child sleep in a different room. We don't cuddle and hold the child. Over here, the child is tied to the breast of the mother and is constantly hearing the heartbeat of the mother, which is what bond him to the mother in the matrix of the womb. So the connection between the matrix of the womb and the matrix of the mother, the transition becomes extremely smooth.
their mothers were bonded to them, an issue I shall discuss more thoroughly in chapter 7, and sensed their every need before that need had to be expressed by crying. The mother responded to the infant's every gesture and assisted the child in any and every move that was undertaken, so that every move initiated by the child ended in immediate success. At
So
2 days
again,
of
over here,
age,
the mother is creating a very safe environment for the child to experience the unknown. So that is where learning will again start taking place.
At 2 days of age, 48 hours, these infants sat bolt upright, held only by the forearms, with a beautifully straight back and perfect head balance, their finely focused eyes staring intently, intelligently at their mothers, and they smiled and smiled.
So you know
New
how
York,
long it takes for a child to bolt up and sit over here, right?
yeah,
Over here they
New,
do
Eu-
it. Yes.
New European type hospitals were being erected in Uganda at the time of Geber's studies. She was granted an additional year to make long term studies, to which I shall return in chapter 7. Only the upper class Ugandan families could afford such luxury, of course, and the women of this class naturally followed the fashion of having their children in hospitals. These hospital delivered infants, it turned out, followed the same civilized schedule American and European infants do. Geber found that they did not smile until some 2.5 months after birth, nor were they precocious in any sense. They showed no signs of sensory motor learning, displayed no uncanny intelligence for some 2.5 months, at which point some signs of intelligence were apparent.
Okay, so
Blood
now
and
where does the problem lie? In the birthing process. In the first case, the mother gave birth herself. Over here, it was a hospital environment.
Blood analysis showed that high levels of adrenal steroids connected with birth stress were still prevalent at 2.5 months. These infants slept massively, cried when awake, were irritable and colicky, frail and helpless. So the issue was not in some racial predisposition towards early intellectual growth. The issue lay solely with what happens to the newborn infant in hospitals. What happens is quite simple. The infant is exposed to an intelligence determined to outwit nature, an intelligence distrustful of anything natural, an intelligence with a vast array of tools at its disposal with which to outwit and, in fact, supplant nature entirely. And in that outwitting and supplanting, damage is done that is incalculable. Future historians will shudder in loathing and horror at the hospital treatment of newborns and mothers in this very dark age of the medicine man, and the surgeon and their uses of chemicals and cuttings. The chemicals dull and stupefy both mother and infant, making birth hazardous, prolonged, difficult, and extreme. So, tools are used for grappling, clawing, sucking the infant out when the natural processes have been made impossible. The Ugandan mother works around her house until some 5 minutes before delivery. In and about an hour, she is out on the streets again, showing her new infant to her neighbors and relatives.
Have you all got that? How much time does normal mother over here take to recover? Over there, it's just immediate.
Frederick Leboyer was a conventional French obstetrician who delivered 9,000 babies by standard methods. He noticed that France, a nation of 50 million persons, had over 1 million dysfunctional children. He began to question general birth practices and realized that hospital deliveries were damaging the infants. He quit his practice, retired to India for 3 years, where he carefully studied native procedures for child delivery in very remote, so called primitive areas. He combined what he saw with his own scientific background and came up with a synthesis. He returned to France and began a new form of delivering infants into the world. And the babies he delivers smile beautifully, continuously, rapturously from some 12 hours after birth. I personally know of several infants delivered in the home by their own parents who have smiled continuously from the first hour of life. And why not? They have been met with love, care, concern, and above all, gentleness and quiet.
So now, when a child is delivered in our hospitals, delivered under artificial lighting, in a cold environment, totally sterile conditions, taken off, and the first thing they do is put the child on a weighing scale, which is absolutely cold, no connection with the mother, and immediately after birth, the child is taken into the nursery. You get that? So now the child is coming into a new matrix, but has no ability to deal with it, but he's totally pushed into it automatically. So it automatically creates a big, huge amount of stress in the child.
In chapters 6 and 7, I will show how technological childbirth and conventional Western notions about the treatment of infants produce an infant who can show no signs of intelligence and surely no signs of pleasure for those standard 2.5 months. I will show that the after effects of technological hospital delivery are permanent. We have built an elaborate body of knowledge, not only rationalizing the damage we have done, but also accepting the damaged product as natural and inevitable. But we accept all the massive problems resulting as human nature. As a father of 5 children, my first reaction to the evidence gathering about me was to shut it out. Did not want to know. I had done the best I could, as had my wife. We had acted conscientiously to a painful degree. We had no recourse but to accept the words of the authorities, for we were products of the age of professionalism. And it has taken me a long while to realize that we were not guilty, a point I want to emphasize here for other parents caught as we were.
Okay, so again, I think in the book it comes out that today we have to spank the child to make it cry. When in the natural birthing process, there's no reason for the child to cry. The breathing automatically starts. We actually spank the child for the breathing to start. Now, if you're stressed out, your breathing is automatically affected. Okay, that's why you need to spank the child to make it start breathing. Next chapter.
Chapter 6 Time Bomb in the Delivery Room. All the anxiety ridden fallacies of our day seem to congregate in the hospital delivery room, where they bring about a disaster that remains largely undetected because it works like a time bomb. None of the parties to the crime ever has to pay, for the explosion takes place in slow fusion over the years and creates such widespread and diverse havoc that few bother to trace it back to see who lit the fuse. The fallacies are personified in the figure of the medicine man, who, donning his bizarre and frightful masks and cloaks, and surrounded by an astonishing array of mechanical wizardry, sets about to outwit nature. Aided by an equally impressive array of chemicals, he sets about to help the victim patient mother avoid the stress inherent within the strange unfolding nightmare. Lost to sight, almost incidental and peripheral to the play of ego, money, and power involved, is the infant, the new life trying to unfold. As everyone knows, this psychologically undifferentiated organism lacks consciousness, perception, and sensation, and all other psychological functions.
So what does this
According,
mean? Indifferentiated organism means that the baby is a part of the mother. It doesn't have a distinct this thing of its own.
according, there can be no awareness. So the attitude is Get the infant out of the way quickly so that we adults can enjoy our self drama. At what point does intelligence, the interaction between an organism and its environment, begin to function? All development, physical and mental, seems to follow a cycle of competence. To use Greenfield and Tronick's term, first there is a roughing in of raw materials, the accumulation of a certain critical mass sufficient to work with. Then there is a filling in of details, an ordering and structuring of that raw mass. Finally, there is a practice of the resulting possibility and an exploration of the variables it affords. Somewhere between the 8th and 12th weeks of fetal development, brain growth begins in an explosion of activity, far outstripping body growth. The growth of the brain cells is a hodgepodge at this early stage. There is a wild profusion of all the different types of cells, those of the high roof brain, those of the basal ganglia, and those to be used for vision, hearing, or in the cerebellum. All these are mixed together without apparent rhyme or reason other than multiplication. This is the period of roughing in. We could hardly call this kind of a growth an organism, much less a thinking organism, because it has no organization. Or has it? Whenever any two like cells are in proximity, they tend to function as a unit. Place two living heart cells a distance apart on a microscopic slide and watch them. They will pulsate randomly, each at its own rate. Move these cells closer together, and at some critical point, they do not have to touch. They will arc the gap between, somehow communicate with each other, and begin to pulsate together and function as a heart. So, almost surely, even two brain cells in proximity begin some preliminary form of interaction. This may not rate as thought in any mature sense, but there is almost surely a form of learning taking place.
So basically, this is what they're talking about is resonance. So if you take a room and you put many of those pendulum clocks in the room and start ticking them in different times, you'll find that after a certain period of time, they will all start to resonate with each other and start ticking at the same time.
Around the fifth prenatal month, this roughing in of raw materials achieves its critical mass, and the cycle of competence shifts to filling in details. A mysterious signal, as Perry calls it, fires into this randomness, and a marvelous ordering instantly begins to take place. With a rush, the cells begin to differentiate and organize themselves according to their innate functions. Neural cells of the optical type start lining themselves into nerves to carry messages from the eyes, oral cells to carry messages from the ears, cerebellum cells to group themselves into that coherent organ next to the old brain. From this point on, the brain functions as a brain, and the function of the brain is to learn. The driving intent within is always to interact with and learn of the content without, and to gain the abilities of that interaction. Thinking most automatically takes place once a thinking organ organizes to speak to a living being or conscious organism. For the first 5 months in the womb may be a matter of aesthetics, but not to recognize the infant in utero as a living, responsive, intelligent creature after that fifth month is ignorance, a blatant ignoring of evidence.
So this is what, like this thing, what was Arjun's son's name?
Shantanu,
No, not Shantanu.
Abhimanyu.
Abhimanyu. So he heard this thing of breaking that chakra when he was in utero, right? So after the fifth month, the child can hear things. So that becomes even more important that the mother remains stress free and always look at and see and feel good things so that she's not stressed out.
Because the research on this subject has grown to much massive proportions in recent years, I will confine my example to one aspect of infant intelligence and relegate additional evidence to the notes and bibliography. Language has long been considered the most difficult, sophisticated, and complex learning the mind brain has achieved. The resulting debate among linguists has long been, how can the child learn language as rapidly as he or she does? After all, language is simply too complex to be so rapidly assimilated. By about age 4, the child's linguistic structure is complete, lacking only logical refinement and vocabulary extension. Noam Chomsky of MIT, for instance, proposed that language must be in some way innate, built into the genes, a proposal that has drawn much ire and fire from all around. Back in the 1940s, Bernard and Sontag found that the infant in utero immediately responded with body movements to sounds from the mother and to sounds in her immediate environment. In 1970, Brody and Axelrod stated categorically that there were no random movements in the newborn infant or in the uterine infant. Every movement, they insisted, has meaning, purpose, and design. Within minutes after birth, the newborn begins in his wake state almost continuous movements of his limbs, body, and head.
Okay,
In
so
19
in that movie na Three Idiots, वो जैसे ही बोलता है all is well, the child kicks.
yeah. In 1974, two Boston University researchers, Dr. William F. Condon and Louis Sander, published a study on the so-called random movements observable in newborn infants. Through sophisticated analysis of high-speed sound movies of scores of newborn infants, Condon and Sander found that these so-called random movements immediately coordinated with speech when speech was used around the infants. Computer studies further revealed that each infant had a complete and individual repertoire of body movements that synchronized with speech. That is, each infant had a specific muscular response to each and every part of his or her culture's speech pattern. One infant, for instance, might move his or her left elbow slightly every time a K sound, as in cough or cat, was used. The sound R, as in father, might elicit a movement of the right foot or perhaps the big toe. These movements proved consistent. The infant made the same movement to the same sound or sequence of sounds. Condon and Sander found that they could catalog and computerize an infant's repertoire of movement coordinates, make up an artificial sound tape of random speech parts, and feed this to the computer to match the tape to the infant's personal repertoire. The computer could then predict the precise movements the infant would make to each of the sounds as they played. Condon and Sander would then play the tape to the infant, making their high-speed movies as they did so. They then checked the results frame by frame. Inevitably, each sound produced the matching physical movement as computerized and catalogued.
So
They
the
then
muscular response to sound.
They then studied older children and finally adults and found the patterns of synchronization to be universal and permanent. By adulthood, the movements have become microkinetic, discernible only by instrumentation, but nevertheless clearly detectable and invariant. The only exception found was in autistic children, who exhibited no such body speech patterning, a point that sorely needs to be considered by those persons and institutions working with autistic children. Because the newborn infant has a distinct repertoire of movements, each child is unique, and the synchronicity can be observed within some 12 minutes after birth. Logic almost compels us to accept as fact that the infant has structured this pattern response, or surely at least roughed in the patterns while in the womb. Certainly, the drive for this patterning must be considered innate, part of the driving intent within needing only the content from without to interact with. Intent preceding the ability to do is the key here. Actual speech does not appear until about a year after birth, but nature has prepared for that momentous and awesome capacity long before. My point in this example is that learning is taking place in utero, and it is the learning of the most complex and intricate human structure. That a learning of such dimensions begins in utero compels us to re-evaluate our notions of learning, perhaps of speech itself, and surely our notions about the infant as a non-differentiated psychic organism. The Condon-Sanders study also indicates the thorough and awesome reaches of nature's biological plan, and we must seriously re-examine our notions and ideas about childbirth and treatment of the newborn. Perhaps now you can see why my statements about the infant in utero structuring a knowledge of his past matrix world were not at all fanciful, for that is exactly what takes place in those last months of prenatal life, or rather, what should take place. When the proper gestation period is over and the infant is ready to leave his or her first matrix and embark on the great venture into the world, it is his or her body that releases the hormones triggering the entire birth delivery system. The mother's body picks up the hormones released by the infant, which in turn trigger her hormones into action. These hormones are passed back to the infant, and back and forth it goes. The two systems, mothers and childs, are designed to work together for a quick, efficient delivery. The birth canal is, after all, very short. Intelligence grows by moving from the known to the unknown and referring back to the known. And never again in life, perhaps not even in death, will intelligence have to make such an extreme and sudden movement, adaptation, and learning in so short a time as that involved in being born into this world. The environmental change is the most extreme that will ever be experienced. The known bears so few points of similarity to the unknown. Not the least of the extremities of change is the transition of oxygen supply, originally given by the mother's body through the placenta and umbilical cord to the infant's own lungs. The lungs require about 5 minutes to begin functioning and establish sufficient regularity. Once this is established, the heart shut off that valve shunting blood through the umbilical cord to the placenta and directs the total blood supply through the lungs. For this critical transition period, nature has provided the infant with a fail-safe mechanism because even a short time of oxygen deprivation permanently damages the brain. The brain gulps oxygen at a prodigious rate, consuming more than the rest of the body. The placenta contains some 30% of the infant's blood and oxygen supply in reserve to cover this transition, and nature provides some 26 inches of umbilical cord so the infant can remain in contact with this reserve supply even after his or her passage. The cord is just the right length, in fact, to allow the infant to be clasped to his or her mother's breast without breaking the connection with his or her oxygen reserves.
So what this implies is that cutting the umbilical cord immediately is not the correct procedure.
Birth is a potential trauma for the infant, even when all goes well, and we must remind ourselves that this infant is highly intelligent, responsive, busily structuring knowledge, with the brain system 5 times larger in size ratio than his body. Anoxia, a fear of oxygen deprivation, is a primal terror in us all, bringing on a flight fight alert of major proportions. And violent change of external conditions is something that we seem to try to avoid at all costs. Following its shifts of position to align properly with the birth canal, the infant's body prepares for delivery by releasing certain hormones. First in line is that master hormone, ACTH. ACTH, as we know, brings about large increases of protein in the liver and brain that are vital to new learning and a corresponding massive growth of new brain cell connections. At every such influx of new cell connections, the brain is prepared for massive new learnings designed to take place stage specifically within a designated time span. The infant's body also releases large amounts of adrenal steroids, those flight fight arousal hormones that we release when seriously startled or frightened. This adrenal response is the infant's way of organizing his or her entire body for its greatest survival maneuver. Its body assumes a typical flight fight posture that neatly streamlines it for passage through the canal. Toes pointed back, fists clenched, back arched. These, by the way, are the physical postures many autistic children are locked into permanently. This condition of all out arousal is termed birth stress. This condition, with its easily recognized physical manifestation and blood changes, proved a key in Marcel Geber's and Mary Ainsworth's comparative studies of American, European, and Ugandan infants. Researchers have long debated the extremes of this infant stress at birth because the extremity does not seem warranted by the situation. In Chapter 7, I will discuss why these infants we see are in such extremities of stress. Here, let me give at least 3 reasons for birth stress in general. First, the physical passage itself, although short in distance and designed by nature to be very short in time, is nevertheless traumatic and not without hazards. The immediate imperative of oxygen production demands extreme alertness of the infant body and total efficiency of all its operations. Adrenaline is just such a stimulant. Second, high stress in the newborn proves to be a key to the physical establishment of bonding with the mother, the subject of chapter 7. Third, and sadly not recognized, birth stress prepares the brain and body for massive new learning. A general alertness, new brain connections, and new proteins are provided for the greatest movement from the known to unknown ever to be undertaken. These 3 effects prove intimately interconnected. Each depends on the success of the other for its proper fulfillment. So we have, at the completion of the uterine period, an infant whom nature has prepared for rapid and extensive new learning. First, it must learn to use new bodily processes never used before, which because of the nature of the womb cannot be practiced in advance. Second, it must learn a radically different matrix environment, the relationships inherent within that new environment, and the new uses of the body and senses within it. In the outside world, the sensory system is called upon to perform functions radically different from those in utero, and nature depends on specific physical responses from the mother to activate and bring this into play. And nature has programmed her into her instinctive physical responses to the infant to meet these highly specific needs. These physical responses not only complete the transition from inter to extrauterine life, but also are a key part of bonding between the mother and infant, on which all development hinges. And what of the act of birth itself? That act, to pull it mildly, varies according to one's culture. When the Australian Aborigine mother is ready to deliver, she drops back from her tribe alone. She digs a hole in the sand, squats over it, delivers her infant, waits for the placenta to discharge, catches and eats the placenta, which is more nourishing than liver and ideal for the mother at that moment. A practice followed by many economical cultures such as the Eskimo, puts the infant to her breast and runs to rejoin her tribe. She is gone an average of 20 minutes. The Ugandan mother, as is typical in non-technological cultures, follows her usual routines until some 5 minutes before the baby appears. She retires to a place of privacy, squats, delivers her young, perhaps with help from a midwife, perhaps not, and resumes her ordinary routines within the hour. The United States has the most expensive medical system in the world and makes childbirth a major economic crisis, for in this country, virtually all children are born in hospitals. The United States also has an astonishingly high infant mortality rate. Not only do our babies die at a record rate, a few years back we stood 16th on the list, but we have now pulled ourselves up to 13th. A little better than East Germany, but not quite up to Hong Kong. But also, so do our mothers. As one front page newspaper story put it, the pill might be dangerous, but it's a lot safer than having a baby. To this, I would add, in the United States, yes.
Can we stop? Should we stop here?
Okay.
Because it's 4:45.
3:45, yeah.
Yeah, from 4 we'll start meditation. Actually, we can go on, but okay, let's stop here. Anyone, anything to say?
No.
It's interesting.
Very, very interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
I should, Niket, you should give these books to the gynecologist.
I swear.
I've been
They are
shouting.
the ones who need it.
I'm shouting from top of the roof every day that every mother should read this book.
Wish we had read it 30 years ago also.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, is it easily available?
Yes, it's available.
Available on Amazon or something.
I'll send the link on the group.
Okay.
So bhaiya, basically the lesser developed economies, they
Yeah.
have a better initiation into the of the child into the world, basically.
Basically, the child is more intelligent.
Yeah, initially that is what
Survive.
happens.
Yeah, to be able to survive the stresses of life. I remember I used to park my car and I used to walk to my office, and there's a group of people who used to, live on the sidewalk. Actually saw some children, when they were born over there and they grew up on the street, but then they've been able to deal with life right over there. If could you
Yeah.
even consider that one of our children being born and living on the street on the footpath? It's impossible.
That's impossible.
You
True.
get that?
But then things do change drastically later on. Though this initial
Because
period
you're
is
because you're giving the child more, the child has more ability,
exposure.
exposure. There were the support system. The support system that the child gets is much more than the.
Yeah, true.
That's the basic distinction.
Okay.
Anyone
Thank
else?
you, Niket. We'll see you at 4 then
Yeah, we'll meet at 4.
via the restrooms.
Yeah, via the restrooms. Please drink a glass of water and go via the restrooms.
Okay, bhaiya. See you at 4.
See you.
at
Thank you,
4.
Niket.
Thank you.
हाँ मेरा सुन रहा है क्या आवाज अभी they can hear me till
Yes,
now they couldn't hear me
we can
they
hear you.
couldn't hear me till then
With Sunita.
I too enjoyed it भैया
Okay, thank you.
yeah I was listening and I was really enjoying it
Great, great. Actually, there's not much explaining to do in this book because it's self-explanatory.
yeah
Thank you, Niket ji.
Thank you, thank you. We'll meet at 4, okay?
से बात नहीं आना ना
Sure. I'll get back.
okay भैया
Okay.
okay आपका Cindy you leave हाँ leaving
I'll just set up the